Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 7th of December, comes to you from London. We start by looking at the dollar. Dollar actually falling away a bit there yesterday, so heading for probably its worst week in quite several weeks. So just a down week for the dollar, but still holding on to its strength. Looking at the euro, we see that's just strengthening against that weaker dollar. So just holding up there, and the yen, the dollar is actually looking a bit stronger today, but has had a pretty bad week against the yen. So dollar just coming off a bit there. Looking at sterling, seeing sterling just pushing lower again this morning. Had recovered yesterday against the dollar, but we still do have these downside targets hanging over us. And the euro, much the same picture. And Against the Swiss franc, we're seeing that as well. Sterling sinking lower this morning. Against the Aussie dollar, holding on to the gains we've seen in the last week. Bitcoin down a further 2% yesterday, now at $3,300, and targets now to 3,100 and 2,300. So we are just seeing 3,300. So we are just seeing that about 5% downside potential. 1960 is a downside target on the medium term chart, so quite a big move from that $20,000 we saw a year ago. Uh, S&P 500 index was down sharply at the open yesterday, but did recover somewhat. We see that in the 60-minute chart. We see the spike down here, but very worrying that we're seeing these markets just falling away. The Nasdaq actually recovered as well. The Dow was down 1/3% in the end, and the Russell 2000 index starting to hit new lows there. We saw yesterday it was touching levels we saw over a year ago. Um, the futures are down 0.5% this morning. The S&P future, the Nasdaq E-mini is down 0.6%. Does suggest another weaker opening in the US. Not as bad as yesterday's opening, probably, but we are seeing that. The FTSE has recovered quite sharply this morning, up 1.5%. Basically, the US market was down heavily when the FTSE closed yesterday, and we've just now recovering back off the back of the US recovery towards the US close. So we are seeing FTSE up sharply, but we are still bearish on all three time frames. The mid caps in the UK also sinking lower, downside targets still hanging over us there. The DAX in Germany up 0.6%, still really sitting at 2-year lows. So that's really significant for European markets. The CAC Quarante, much the same picture, up strongly this morning, up 1.3%, but bearish in all three time frames. The Japanese market was up just about 0.75%, and so we are seeing the Asia bounce back a little bit. The Hang Seng was still down 1/3%, still looking worrying, and this long-term trend now breaking. China was actually up just very, very slightly, but still the charts look terrible here. And the Sensex also just selling off as well. The Aussie market up 0.4%. And again, we're seeing the trends here cracking with downside targets on the Aussie market, so still quite worrying. Brent crude is down slightly this morning. OPEC meeting being in focus, but we are bearish still. WTI also sinking lower, down 0.25%. US nat gas back to 431. That was the targets that we had on the short-term charts. We've still got some downside targets, but holding on to the $4 area for the first time in years, so looking still pretty strong. Gold is up this morning, just very slightly, hanging on to its bullish trend, and silver is up as well. US 10-year yields sinking lower, 288. It's hard to believe we were in the low 280s at one point. That's starting to have an impact on the targets on the charts. We're not quite unwinding the targets that we saw, but the market now not pricing in rises from the Fed. We're seeing German bonds yesterday rose very sharply, starting to look bullish again as the fear of a recession kicks in. Looking at Yahoo data, quick look at the Nasdaq. We see here we've got Alphabet up 1.7%, Apple up was down 1% in the end, so that recovery didn't really kick in for Apple yesterday, and that is still a worry for the market. Amazon actually did recover to be 1.85% up on the day, Facebook uh, is, if we look at Facebook shares, they were up 1.2%, but still looking very bearish on the charts, having underperformed the Dow by 25% this year. So Netflix, we're up 2.7%, and Microsoft up 0.6%. So we are still seeing some of these tech shares recovering. Nvidia was up 0.75%, but still not looking great. Tesla up just under 1%, and still one of the better looking charts in bullish mode on both time frames. Taking a look at the Aussie market, some quite big moves here. Star Entertainment up 5%. On the downside, we did have Adelaide Brighton down 9%, and Oath Holdings down a massive 35%. So we saw really big fall there. China, mixed picture. We said it was just slightly up, so we had some stocks up 4%. On the other side of the cord, that was balanced by stocks down 4%. No big surprise there. Hong Kong was mostly in the red. It was one market that didn't fare so well, and the Nifty, quite a mixed performance there. Kotak up 6.4%. So starting to look like this chart is holding on to its bullish trend. The Nikkei was mostly bullish as well. Taking a look at the FTSE in London, the FTSE 100 this morning up quite sharply, as we said. Tesco up 4.95%, so that's looking pretty strong. And we are just seeing some quite big moves there. On the downside, only three stocks down, and these were the stocks that were up yesterday mostly. So we are seeing a bit of a change there. Taking a look at the 250, we've got Premier Oil up 5%. Games Workshop up 4.7%, holding on to its bullish trend, looking pretty good. And then in Europe, on the Euro stocks, we just ranked by performance. All this data coming from Yahoo, of course. On the downside, Fresno's down 10%, BTG down 3%. So we are seeing some. That's in the process of a bid at the moment, of course. So Stora Enso, Finnish companies, actually been quite badly hit this morning. Looking on the upside, we've got Wirecard and Tesco, which we've already talked about. So market looking a lot more positive today. It will all be about the US Open. That's it for now. Until Monday, happy charting. See you then.